Hey everybody, welcome to the Legacy Podcast. My name's Bill Dupenthaler.
And I'm Mike Conan, and this is a podcast for disciples who want to make disciples.
All right, well, welcome back everybody. Bill Dupenthaler here with Mike Conan. We just love doing this. This has been pretty fun. How long have we been doing this now? It's like a year and a half, something like that?
I think it has been a year.
Yeah, I mean, at least, yeah.
I don't even know.
It just seems like it's a part of the regular routine now. Just, it kind of is. Getting together every week, doing these podcasts, and
It's fun.
yeah, it is fun. And we're right in the middle of a series right now talking about secret sauce. And we talked about the secret sauce of our ministry, legacy being relationships. And we really, really believe that relationships are key to everything that we do. And we made the case, I think, in the last few weeks that clearly the Lord values relationships, and He demonstrated that clearly in the Scriptures, and we've experienced it. And we made the case last week that man, there's a huge need in the world for relationships, right?
There really is. I mean, not to rehash what we talked about last week in full detail, but the more we thought about it, the more we talked about it, the more I thought, man, people really are isolated.
Yeah.
A high percentage of people are isolated. Maybe they have one person they're close to, their spouse, and that's it.
Yeah. But if you didn't get a chance to listen to that episode, highly recommend that. It's just so much stuff there that is just such a huge need for what we're talking about. And so today's episode, we're kind of getting into this idea of well, what does this secret sauce taste like? I guess, what is this? So how do we do relationships? So what is it when we're talking about relationships being the secret sauce, relationships being super important? What does that mean for us?
Well, and I was thinking about it, Bill, and we were talking about this beforehand, like, okay, where do we go with this, and how does it unfold? But that's what we think that our ministry and what separates it from others. And again, we're in favor of all ministries, especially disciple-making ministries, where people, in essence, are valued, and people are seen, and people are heard, and there's a connection that happens with people. And, our three things are: we want to connect people to God, connect people to relationships with each other, and then connect people to the Great Commission. And of course, the church is in there somewhere in that relationships with each other and God and the Great Commission. But that's our three main things: to God, to people, and then to the Great Commission. And so today we're talking about how do we get connected to other people.
Right.
And it is interesting. One of my kids actually went through a relationship making class.
Wow.
He was just having a little bit of challenges in how to build relationships. So he went through an 8-week course, very expensive, frankly, on how to teach him to make relationships because he didn't innately do it like other kids do. And I was thinking about that as we're thinking about this podcast and going, I think in some ways as adults, we regress. As kids, you naturally build relationships with people. But adults, you're self-sufficient and you don't need other people. And especially today with our iPhones and other things, we're so independent. Maybe this is like, going back to preschool in some ways, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, because when you're growing up, you're thrown. You have a class.
Yeah.
You're in elementary school, and they're together the whole year, and then when middle school and high school, you're in classes. When you're in college, university, you're in classes. So you're just naturally the first 20 plus years of your life, you're thrown into these situations where you just naturally have a lot of people around you.
Yeah.
But then, like you say, all of a sudden you get out into the real world, and you have a job, and you just kind of, you have some colleagues at work, but it's often not the same thing.
Well, and some people don't want to build too deeper relationships with the people they work with because they don't want them to know their stuff.
Right. So, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And the isolation, everything we've talked about. So how do we do relationships? I think one of the things I really like to think about a lot is this whole idea that assuming that God is actually at work in in everything that goes on in our day.
Yeah.
So there are no coincidences that we just, happen to run into somebody, or we happen to have somebody come to mind, you
Yeah.
know, or whatever it might be. I mean, we come across somebody on social media, and yeah, I mean, we see faces every day on social media, but isn't it interesting how sometimes you're going through, and then just someone just like, oh man, and then you stop, and it's one of those moments where, if you're in tune to and thinking about that God is at work, then you realize, okay, this is an important moment right now.
Right. I think that the undergirding of all of that is quite simply this idea that God just calls us to be relational. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago. Jesus himself came to build relationships with us, his people, and calls us to do the same.
Yeah.
And we're his disciples were actively building relationships with people. Throughout history, this is how lives have been changed, is by someone building a relationship with somebody else.
Yeah.
And there's a connection that happens that is real, and a connection that happens that's supernatural, which is what we want for people. We want for people to have connections with each other that are supernatural, where
Yeah.
God is at work. And I think that is just one of those profound things that we think about.
Yeah. I was thinking about, we were at the coffee shop whenever it was. It was within the last year, and Mike Carver came in.
Yep.
And he sat down near us, and Mike has a podcast called Wingman,
Yep.
and or something like that.
Yeah, wingman.
Yeah, Wingman. And we got to talking about that, and how do you do your podcast? And he says, well, I've got a guy that helps produce it for us, and oh, who's that? Oh, his name is Joe. Oh, well, we were kind of looking for somebody that could help us with our podcast as well. So
Yeah.
so then we end up meeting Joe, and now Joe is not only producing our podcast, but has become a good friend, and a part of Legacy and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's just like one of hundreds and hundreds of examples, but kind of cool.
Yeah.
Oh, was that just a coincidence that Mike walked in that day, and just a coincidence that we met Joe? And no, not at all.
No, it's definitely, there's a greater purpose where God is working, and he's especially working in the context of relationships. And so I think that's the thing, that as we think about relationships, we talk about how we would build relationships. The framework that we want to have is that God is doing this. It's not going to be a Bill thing. It's not going to be a Mike thing. Yes, if you have a personality like Bill, if you're extroverted and you're super friendly and confident and all the things like that, you are going to be able to build more relationships naturally. It is just going to happen for you. And there are people who are just naturally extroverted,
Right.
who this is their sweet spot. But we're not talking necessarily about those kind of relationships. We are, and to some degree, we're not talking about your own natural ability to do this. We want to have supernatural relationships. That's our goal,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
the bottom line. That's the secret sauce. It's not, hey, we're friendly guys. I mean, that is, hopefully we are, and hopefully
Right.
we're nice and those things. But we, from the very beginning, just want to establish that if you're going to do this, the secret sauce is really trusting the Lord, and trusting the Lord to work in those relationships ahead of time, to be preparing that person for that moment, or you're part of their preparation for the next moment. You don't
Right,
know,
right.
but it's going to be a relationship with you that is going to be a really important part of their journey.
Yeah.
So I think that's a
Yeah.
lot.
Well, Jesus used to say, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear. He who
Yeah.
has eyes to see, let him see." I mean, I think you're our resident theologian, but I, at least the way I read that, he's saying, keep your spiritual eyes open, keep your spiritual ears open, be listening, be looking, be aware of what God is doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the bottom line. And uh, there's a sense here also, if we're just going to say, how do we practically live into that? Part of what we want to do is to be people who are praying for these things.
Yeah.
And be these things, we mean, intentional relationships, God moments,
Yeah.
divine appointments, whatever you want to call them, where we find ourselves drawn to somebody. And
Yeah.
that I wish I could explain it better, but I think you did a good job earlier where it's just somebody comes to your mind who maybe you've thought about them or maybe you keep coming to them. And usually for me, it's not always a first time because I'm a little stubborn and sometimes I don't pay close attention. But almost always, God will circle back and give me two or three things with this particular person.
Yeah.
One is, something like that. If I ever dream about anybody ever, I always contact them the next day. And I don't know if that's your practice too, but I've found that sometimes God does do that, and it's crazy. Like I'll contact them, and it'll be just what they needed.
Yeah.
You
Isn't
know,
that crazy?
yeah. And other times, I'll see them, or I'll think about them, and or I've got my list of people I'm regularly going with too. But
Right, right.
yeah,
Yeah. No, it is, and it's really fun too. When you actually, and we do teach, for those of you that maybe haven't been around us that much. I mean, if you've been in a legacy group or been around us personally very much, you'll hear us talking about this whole idea of divine appointments all the time. And we teach it, and we really ask people, that's what we're talking about right now, to be thinking every single day about that concept and be asking the Lord to bring you divine appointments. And when you do that, I mean, it is so fun when you
right.
go through the day,
Yeah,
and we often will meet at the same coffee shop every time. I don't
yeah,
mind plugging them at Cutter's Point
yeah.
in Gig Harbor, and part of the reason we meet there is because we just so often it just seems like the Lord brings people into that shop at just the right moment. And definitely been times when I've been there, you've been there, and somebody walks in and you're just kind of like, all right,
Yeah,
I knew it.
right. Yeah,
That's the person that I was supposed to meet here today.
yeah. It is that happens a lot. It
Yeah,
does. If we're open to it.
if you're open to it.
And then I think the other thing that we think about, not only do we want people to think about this being a God thing, and not only want them to pray and be open to how God would work, but then there is that part where there's something required, right? Like we can't just expect God to do all the work, right?
Yeah,
We have to actually be proactive, which means we're the one who has to take the initiative. And this is how I think all followers of Jesus tend to think: is God shows us something, and then that's our invitation to join him. As Henry Blackaby says, you're okay. I get it, Lord. I'm going to go talk to them.
right.
I'm going to take the initiative. I'm going to be proactive. I'm not just going to react. Seldom ever do good relationship makers say, Lord, if they come over to me, then I'll talk to them. If they come over, I mean, that is just, it does happen. If you're a super introvert, try it. I mean, both of us are more extroverted and are able to go to somebody else, but maybe you can't. So you just have to pray that prayer. But we would encourage you to go the other end if you can learn to be trusting the Lord that, you know what, this is not my thing. This
Yeah.
is not a my thing. It's not a Bill thing. This is a God thing. And I'm just going to go over here and be nice and
Yeah,
listen.
yeah. Well, and also another aspect of being proactive and being intentional, we talk about this all the time too, is having a list.
Yep.
Like actually doing what Jesus did and praying and asking God to give you the people that He would want you to be initiating with and building relationships with, and if you do that, and you actually take the time to pray and think about it, and like literally, God's going to bring names to mind.
Yes.
You know?
And they might be names that you know and names that you don't know. I guess we want to dig into like how would you start a relationship with somebody, because that,
Yeah.
I mean, basics. But before we do that, I think there has to be a little warning here, right? Like we have to say something that says, don't do this just for your end goal in mind. Even
Right.
though we want to have an end goal of everybody becoming a devoted follower of Jesus and becoming a disciple who makes disciples, that is what we want for the whole world. We want that more than anything.
Yeah.
And yes, that is our end goal, but you can't focus on the end goal always. Like sometimes you do just enough motivation to get you going.
Mm-hmm.
But the goal when you're meeting with somebody is to connect with them and to show them that they're valuable, show them that show them that they're worth loving, show them that somebody thinks that they're worthy of connecting with.
Yeah.
I don't know. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, funny thing is, I just read this morning 1 Corinthians 13,
Yeah.
which is the love chapter, and near the end, it says that that now we know in part, but one day we'll know in full. But right now, there's three things that remain: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. And then it basically says, so above everything else, pursue love. It doesn't say pursue anything else. It says pursue love. And so our job isn't to change them. Our job isn't to convert them. Our job isn't to...
That's the Holy Spirit's job. Yeah.
Right. Our job is to love them unconditionally, meaning there's no conditions to the love.
And
right?
Maybe another way to look at it is we're giving them a taste of the love of God for them.
Yeah.
That's the goal. The goal is to give them a taste of how much God loves them. And of course, we talked about this before. The key to that is ourselves being loved by God and knowing it and being transformed. But nobody likes to be a project. Everybody thinks you're trying to sell them something if you're too nice.
Yeah.
And nobody likes to be manipulated. And so those are the challenges that we face in our inner being is we have this greater goal, but the greater goal is not for our self, but it's for them. And maybe that we can just end it with that is when you're thinking about that greater goal, it's not for you to get a notch on your belt to say, oh my gosh, another one for Mike, another one for Bill. Oh, this is great. Man, I'm really on fire today. I had friends who had people sign their Bibles. And so they would show everybody, all these people who'd signed their Bibles, whom they had led to the Lord.
Oh, no way, really?
Yeah. And in some ways it was awesome because you're so inspired by these people but in other ways it felt really self-righteous.
A notch in the belt.
And so there's a moment where you just think, that we're not trying to make you a disciple for our sake. It's for the Lord and for you. Like that, this is the best thing for you. This is what you're made for. And so, anyway, probably enough on that.
No, I was going to just say there's certainly nothing wrong with celebrating, what God has done. And one of my favorite little hidden verses, and I can't remember the address of it right now in the New Testament, but Paul makes a little kind of obscure reference to Epinetus, the first convert in Asia.
Oh yeah,
there's a little verse, and I had a friend that moved to Sitka, Alaska, and he had been praying and praying and praying, and he was with Young Life at the time, and of course he was just developing relationships, hadn't started the ministry really yet, and I pointed that verse out to him, and I said, okay, Brent, I want you to be praying for your Epinetus.
Oh, that's cool.
And I remember when he texted me and said, "Hey, guess what?" And so so I think it certainly is cool to celebrate those kind of things.
And perhaps it's for prayer and follow up. I just it's that moment though where people don't like that.
Yeah,
people don't like you to be used. People want to. It actually makes them feel less valuable. If you do this the wrong way.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, let's talk about this. So how do you have a conversation with somebody? What do you do? I mean, we're thinking about this from not a preschool perspective, but we're adults and it's a little bit more complicated as adults. Preschoolers just go up and say, hey, and you're on your track. But I think that is the thing that we would say that you do have to start with is there was a book that came out a while ago in a series by Bill Hybels called Just Walk Across the Room. And like we said, that's the thing that is the first thing you have to do is you're going to be the one who goes across and starts the conversation. So maybe what we think about is, okay, how do we do this? How do we start a conversation? What would you talk to somebody about? Like you do this all the time, Bill. Like, what's your approach? Like, if you see somebody, how do you start it?
Well, of course, it depends on the situation. If it's somebody I haven't seen for a long time versus somebody I see pretty regularly,
sure.
But if it's somebody I haven't seen for a while, and we actually, I mean, obviously, if it's just in the coffee shop and it's just a brief encounter, it really would be more of a hey, let's try and find a time to get together. Let's make sure I have the right contact information, and or maybe even like set a date right then and there.
Yeah.
And so I guess that'd be the first point is if you're going to develop relationships, you have to initiate and you actually have to, like mechanically make it happen. Actually setting a date and a time.
Right.
And a place.
So maybe one could say that as you're thinking about that first goal is you're trying to connect with them enough where you could connect with them more. Like there's enough that happens in that moment where if you're seeing the person, maybe it's the first time you're seeing them, or maybe it's somebody you haven't seen in a while, but your goal is to get to know them better, right?
Yeah.
I mean that's kind of the bottom line to start with is creating this kind of a connection.
Yeah. So I was just going to say, and as you would say, Mike, this would be a freebie.
Yeah, I love it.
So one of the things that I've found with actually trying to set appointments with people,
Yeah.
is if you say something like, "Hey, I'm wide open. Just give me a call." That is never going to happen.
Good. That's good advice right there.
You need to be really specific, and even to the point of, hey, looking at my phone, what about Wednesday at 2 o'clock? Does that work for you? And so like literally, it's like suggesting a really specific thing, because then when you suggest a really specific thing, then they get their calendar out and they say. Either yes, that works, or no, Wednesday at 2 doesn't work, but I could do it at 4.
So good. That's such good advice.
So like,
That's good advice.
So just because that's, I think a lot of times relationships never happen, and everybody's done this 1,000 times. Hey, it'd be great to get together one of these days. Hey, it's so good to see you, man. We should talk. Yeah, dude, for sure. Okay, see you later. It'll never happen.
Yeah. So again, let's just
Bring this back.
Circling in here. I love what you're saying, and let's circle it back to say the people that we're talking about building relationships are people who have wandered away or who don't know Jesus.
Okay,
that is
so that's
what we're
one
talking
context.
and that's what we're talking about. Bottom line is that we want to build relationships with people with the intention of them becoming disciples of Jesus.
Yeah.
And so if you're talking to somebody and they already have 50 friends and they're in a small group and they're in a church and that is not the type of people that we're talking about connecting with necessarily. It might be great for you to connect with them, but we're talking about how do you connect with somebody in a way that could draw them into something. And so we have a couple of ideas for you. The first thing that I thought of was just as a general concept, you want to be empathetic. And it's a lost art today. And empathy simply means that you're able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and framework, where you are actively trying to understand where they're coming from. You're taking as much of yourself away from the situation as possible and trying to understand and put yourself in somebody else's place. And I have found that is a lost art today. And how have you found, Bill, a way that you're able to be empathetic with people? And what's some of the secrets that you found to help you become more empathetic?
Well, that's a good question. I guess I usually always try to start a conversation by, especially if it's somebody I haven't seen for a while, just to, I use this phrase a lot. Well, tell me your story.
Right. I like that one too.
Okay, I remember this, and this, but since this date, like I have no idea really. So bring me up to date on your life, and what's encouraging you and what you've been doing and things like that. And that really gets them talking. And then that's where you really need to be like practicing the empathy and listening and trying to hear and kind of read between the lines, that kind of thing.
I have found that people's faces are the number one way to become empathetic. You listen to their stories too, like you were saying, but the people tell you a lot in their face. A lot in their face. The founder of Promise Keepers, McCartney, Bill McCartney, coach at University of Colorado, successful coach. The story is that how he started it was he had a guy come to him and was talking about mentoring him, and his wife. He looked at Bill McCartney's wife and realized her countenance was not good, and he told Bill McCartney and said, "Hey, I just got to tell you, I'm not sure about this ministry for you," or something like that. I don't remember exactly, because I'm not sure about your wife. As I look into her face, this is what I see. And then he challenged Bill to look into her face. And he realized it was the first time that he'd looked into her face in years. And most people don't have anybody who's looking into their face. And I mean, I'm not staring, but I'm talking
Yeah.
about and really being somebody who's able to look into somebody's countenance and face and intuitively recognize, man, this person is in a joyful
There's something
spot,
going on,
a
right?
painful spot.
Yeah.
There's something here that is resonating, and so there is this background that we get, like we do want to know, hey, where are you from? What's going on? But then there's also this part, what's going on? Something's going on. I could tell something's going on. Tell me about it. That's what I will say. Something I could tell something's going on. Tell me about it. What's going
Yeah.
on? You know,
And sometimes too, when people are telling you their story, there will be like sections that are obviously left out.
yeah,
Like you haven't seen them for 5 years or 10 years or something, and they're talking about their job and all these other things, and nothing is said about their family, or nothing is said about their faith.
yeah,
And then it's kind of like, okay, so tell me about your family.
yeah.
You know, but I think you learn a lot about.
That's a great way to do it.
You,
Yeah,
you learn a lot by what's not said and
yeah,
what's left out.
yeah. And it doesn't have to be a depressing conversation either. Always when you're
No,
connected to people, but
no.
almost always, if they don't know Jesus, they're not walking with Him. There's a good chance that they have, unfortunately found a lot of bumps in the road and a lot of challenges. And so there's a
Yeah,
lot of opportunity to really, and I think for a lack of a better term, entering into people's pain is part of what Christians are supposed to
yeah,
do.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know, we mourn with those who mourn, we rejoice with those who rejoice. And so that's part of being a Christian.
yeah. Well, and so often, in particular on the faith side of things, when if they don't just volunteer it, I inevitably will ask about their faith and their walk with God and that kind of thing. And inevitably, when it's not going well, there's going to be a story of pain behind it.
Yeah.
You know, like almost 100% of the time. And I was following God. I was doing well until this happened.
Yeah.
And then they go on and tell their story, and we prayed, and then she died anyway.
Right.
And so after that, sorry, but I'm just not there anymore.
Yeah. And the other thing we deal with too is pain and shame. It's country cousin, which is
Yeah.
pain is something I think that's inflicted on us. We feel like, some of us cause our own pain. And when we cause our own pain, I think it causes us to feel shame. And even when other people cause pain to us, we feel shame. And, shame is a pretty predominant theme of the Bible. We could do a whole podcast on it. Honestly, I've done a whole sermon series on shame because it's such a big deal.
Yeah.
It's such a big deal. It's the first thing that is described as for our sinful condition is shame. And what shame does, I think, is shame takes us to a place where we have less confidence in who God made us to be. And so we shrink back from the call that God has put on our lives. And we shrink back from receiving all that He would have for us in who we are in being adopted as His children, who we are in being justified by Christ and sanctified by Christ. We pull back from those things because we think we're not good enough. And I find that that's the case with a lot of people who we're trying to enter into a relationship with and we're trying to be empathetic with. It's being conscious of pain and conscious of shame, I think, that are really important. And God doesn't want them to feel shame. Pain God uses, but God's shame is
Right.
not something that is of the Lord.
Right.
It
Right.
is really, there's not a case for it. I
Right.
mean, other than it might lead us to the Lord. I mean, that's the only case you could be. And I think the other part that you said that's so important is that listening piece. Dan Allender has this line where he says I'm stealing I already stole part of his thing, but there's two main ways that we love people. One is to look into their faces, and two is to listen to their stories. And there is something about when you want to be in a relationship with somebody and you want to give them a taste of God. I mean, part of what God does really well is listen. And I think that's part of our relationship with Him is knowing that God listens to us. But we also then have to value other people's stories more than they do because we believe God is writing their story. That's what blows people's minds is if you're more interested in their story than they are,
Yeah.
it blows their minds, right? Have you
Yeah.
had that experience
Yeah.
before?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And just to continue on this idea of of conversations and how to develop relationships and listening. I think part of that is asking good questions too.
Yeah.
And so a good question is not, "Hey, how's it going?" or "So what's up?" or "Did you have a good week?"
Right.
You
Right.
know?
Those are good questions if you don't want to talk to somebody.
Yeah,
And you
exactly.
don't want to connect with them.
Right.
We all do
right.
that.
Yeah. So try to ask open-ended questions that really spur on discussion. So tell me, and these are probably more with people that you're more in regular contact with, as opposed to a first time. I think the first time you meet with somebody, it's usually the broader tell me your story and those kind of things. But
Yeah.
but say you've got somebody that, like, we're talking about discipling, right? And so you've got these people and you get together. Well, tell me a couple of things that have been really encouraging to you this week.
Yeah.
Or hey, you were at the Apple Cup on Saturday night, the game between the football game between the Huskies and the Cougars, which I'm wearing my Huskies shirt, by the way. Just
I'm there with you in heart.
yeah. But hey, what were a couple highlights for you or maybe if you were a Cougar fan, what were a couple lowlights?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of ways to do that, I think. When we're thinking
Yeah.
about people, that is the bottom line. We want to hear their stories, want to celebrate their joys and enter
Yeah.
into their
Yeah.
sorrows and have that connection with them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the way we do that is by, I think, quite simply being proactive, looking at them, actually engaging them as a person, trying to empathize with where are they coming from, what's going on in their life. And then if we were to take the next step, we would say the last piece here, and we'll kind of wind it down with this,
Yeah.
is the follow up. If they tell you something, next time you see them, hey, how's that going?
Right.
That's such a powerful way to keep connecting with people. I love it when people do that with me. Hey, Mike, how's this situation going? I've had a handful of people my whole life who do that. Most people don't. Most people are so focused on themselves or so focused on so many
Yeah.
things that they don't remember. That shows people that you're valuable to them and that they're valuable to somebody. And hopefully that gives them a taste that they're valuable to God.
Yeah.
The other piece that we think about when following up is, of course, being proactive to be the one who says, hey, let's get together again. This is really fun.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it kind of feels like we're telling people how to date, but it is kind of in
It
some
is.
ways,
Yeah, it is.
parallel to that in
Yeah.
a good way.
Yeah.
Anything else you would add to the follow up piece?
Well, I think the final one, I guess, would be to pray for them. And there's been different times over the years that I've been better and worse at doing this. At my best, I've got a list of people that I'm actually praying for.
Yeah.
That I'll actually pull the list out or it's on my phone or whatever and use that to pray. At my worst, I say, hey, I'll be praying for you, and then I don't. But ideally you'd be praying for people.
Pro tip, if I can intervene here, is always pray for the person in that moment.
Yes.
If you're ever going to say, I'll pray for you, pray for them in that moment. And if it's not the appropriate to pray out loud, pray inside your heart.
Yeah.
And inside your
Yeah.
head.
I love that. And we'll close with that because I think that is such a cool thing to do. And by the way, most people have never had somebody like pray for them right then and there.
I have talked to so many people who are from so many different places, and I've never had any one of them, not one of them, tell me, no, I don't want you to pray for me.
Right. You're right. Yeah.
Ever. It's
Yeah.
always that. The answer to that one's always yes.
Yeah.
Well, we're running out of time here. We could talk for a lot more about this, but in summary, relationships are important. And it is our secret sauce of what we're trying to teach people to become as relational people. It doesn't matter if you're introverted, extroverted, maybe it'll look a little different given your personality, given who you are.
Right.
But God wants all of us to be building relationships with people, and especially wants us to be building relationships with people who don't know him.
Yeah.
And who, or who have wandered away from him.
Yeah.
And so we'll just kind of leave it at that. And as we're winding it down, again, we're just so thankful you listen. So thankful to be doing this ministry together. We're thankful for the financial provision God has given us, but we also do have a need for more financial support. And so if you prayerfully consider partnering with us financially, either monthly or perhaps a large end of year donation, we would greatly appreciate that.
Yep.
We would also, if you don't mind, just taking a moment we would covet your prayers for our ministry. Covet your prayers for us to raise up more disciple makers. Covet your prayers for financial provision and just wisdom. And, as we want to continue to move forward as an organization, there's a lot of stuff going at Legacy right now that's really cool. You could check out more at www.ourtruelegacy.com. But that's probably enough for now.
Yeah.
Thankful to be together. And as always, we are excited to be a part of disciples making disciples.
Amen.